Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. My name is Emma, and I have Jason with me today, and we're going to be talking about the idea of early adopters, maybe fast followers, and how to unlearn habits. But before I get to all the questions that I've got for you, can you give everybody a quick introduction?
Yeah, I'd love to. First off, thanks for having me, Emma. I've been looking forward to this for some time. I know we've had quite a few conversations, so it's cool to do it here on your podcast. So my name is Jason Schultz. I've been an agent of change, chaos pilot, an innovator, navigator of uncertainty. Been called a lot of names for some time. Currently, my career, I'm focused in on the legal space, where I serve as a chief innovation and technology officer for an AmLaw 200 firm that has offices across the U.S. And a growing opportunity in multiple practice areas and our consulting business. So I've been here for 5 years, and I oversee everything we're doing from a cybersecurity and data privacy perspective, like core IT operations and technology operations, and then what the organization is doing from an innovation, change management, process improvement perspective. So I'm all about change and figuring out ways to identify, novel solutions, apply them to meaningful problems, and hopefully deliver value.
Well, I'll try to keep all of my colorful names that I might want to call you under wraps while we're doing the interview.
There's more than that list. I kept it short for you.
But so we're going to dive into this idea of kind of like managing change and specifically rolling something out, like rolling some sort of software implementation or maybe process change out to a company, especially a larger group. And so when we were kind of prepping for this conversation and talking through things, as I teased in the introduction, we kind of talked about the fact that you're always going to have like your early adopters that are excited and ready to kind of take that leap with you. And what I want to dive into as we get started here is, when do we need full everybody on the team immediately adopting a solution? And or when does it make sense to lean into those early adopters and maybe take a more staggered approach to the way that we're rolling something out?
Mm-hmm. Well, I think it depends on the change and the impact of the change. We have a variety of strategic initiatives and programs that are always being supported in some way, and they don't necessarily all apply to the same audience. So I would say, when it's enterprise-wide or when it's something that you're doing to maybe mitigate risk or seize a new opportunity, sometimes you have to get everyone on board very quickly. But oftentimes, I would say that taking an incremental approach, aim small, miss small, deep breaths, baby steps, all the different phrases that are thrown around, I think, usually works, because most innovation is typically incremental, not necessarily very disruptive. But sometimes you got to do big disruptive things, and that requires, I think, everyone to get on board and participate from day one.
So how do we start to identify who are our like early adopters, who are, I think you called them FOMO, fast followers, like see the benefit, want to get involved? Like how do you go through that process of kind of thinking through like when and how you find those people for those opportunities that maybe aren't like this immediate need or like mitigating risk? How do you find those people and then get them on board?
Well, so first, I think it starts with just identifying like what is it we're trying to do. And so anytime we're implementing change, we always like to start with, setting a foundation and kind of creating a sense of urgency. And so for us, really, we have to be able to answer 3 questions, which is why do anything, which goes back to finding the right problems to solve. Why do we need to do it now? And then ultimately, why do we have to do what's being recommended, suggested by the team? So that's first and foremost, I think, the most important step. And then from there, again, once you've identified the right problem to solve, I think that helps you kind of zero in on who you need to rally around and what type of coalition I think you need to develop. For us, we identify champions a lot of different ways. Sometimes people just have their hands up, and that's sometimes all we need. We just need people willing to lean into the learning and fail forward and try something new. Oftentimes, though, we need a little bit more than just someone with their hand up. We need folks that are maybe close to the problem or close to the use case, or maybe they're in a position where they can influence others around that use case or problem. And so anyone that we can find that ultimately will act as an influencer, can validate what we're doing, and really help us bridge, I think, the gap between, the targeted project or program and then how we want to apply it maybe to a broader audience. We've done it a variety of ways. I mean, sometimes it's just good old-fashioned relationship development and relationship management, going out and having conversations. We've done stuff where we've fly on the wall observation, just sitting with people, watching how they work, seeing what they're doing, seeing what their pain points are. We interact with a lot of folks across the organization that are running different areas of the business. And oftentimes they'll share feedback as well. Sometimes we actually mine data. So like one example would be on the technology side, we get a lot of, help desk, service desk type request tickets. And so there's a lot of very useful information in those inquiries to say, hey, wait, there's something here. We've heard about this 2 or 3 times. This person keeps coming back to us. They might be a really good person that we want to engage because they seem very motivated to resolve the issue or the problem that they're having. So surveys, we've done a lot of different ways, but I think it starts with like, are these the right people? Do they have the energy, the passion? Are they in a position where they can influence and champion ideas? And then we kind of go from there. Because just because you have the problem doesn't mean you're the person that can help us, evangelize it and get others on board.
That's a really good point to make, because and you even mentioned like the energy, like where someone might be in terms of workload or current capacity based off of all sorts of different factors can influence whether they're the right person to bring in early to a project. And to your point, just because they have the problem doesn't mean that they necessarily are in the position to be able to support it and get other people excited with it.
Yeah, spot on. So it's usually a mix. You have to get a diverse stakeholder group, kind of cover all your bases. So, like as an example, like if we have a really interesting use case, AI is all the talk, right? So, the default position would be like, we gotta, let's go get some of the folks that maybe are a little bit more junior in the organization, that are a little bit more tech savvy. Well, that's great, but they might become super users and they might be folks that are going to be part of what we're doing. But I don't know if those are the same people all the time that are going to go out and get others on board, right? So we need people that are in different levels of the organization, across the organization, as opposed to just the people that are excited about going about and, implementing the change.
So one of the things that we talked about too, when we were like looking through this idea of how do we identify these people? How do we get them on board? Maybe we need the support of somebody who is a little more resistant, but we know that they're going to be somebody that is a really great asset. One of the things that has to happen is kind of unlearning past ways of thinking, past processes, so that you have the capacity to think in a new way. How do we, as an organization, or like anybody that's in a position similar to you, how do you support that unlearning process that has to go side by side with the learning of technology and like thinking about things in a new way?
Well, I think there's a real opportunity for education and training. You have to make people feel comfortable, I think, making the change, which requires unlearning. And so if you can do that, if you can take a more agile approach, more of an iterative approach, you don't have to make it, overly uncomfortable, if you will. So just get them to do small things, get small wins, and then they start to see a pattern like, wow, I'm going in a completely different direction. I'm way outside of my comfort zone, but all these good things are happening. All this growth is happening as a result of my ability to keep, finding comfort and discomfort, my willingness to do things a little bit differently, my willingness to color outside the lines, maybe a little bit differently than I have historically. Like I'm seeing meaningful value-added change as a result of that. So I think being able to deliver, small wins very quickly is one way for people to feel really comfortable letting go of the old and kind of welcoming in the new a little bit. So that's what we've seen. And then once you have that behavior and it's being modeled by others, then it's not the person that's behind, the implementation, the project, the change. It's you're pointing back to other stakeholders that are already out there doing it, and that becomes validation for others to also start to unlearn. Sometimes, we've had situations where people just aren't aware of what's happening, the trends, the pace of change, things that are happening around them. And so sometimes you have to have like passionate debates and discussions to say like, listen, this is what's going on. Like we can either disrupt or be disrupted. So sometimes I wouldn't say I would use fear. I don't think that's the right word, but you do want people to feel like if they don't do something, if they don't change, if they don't unlearn, like it might not work out. And there's a lot of things happening right now, a lot of disruption that's happening right now that I think is making folks feel that way. And so I just feel that you either can disrupt or be disrupted. And I think it's actually better to be on the side of the disruption than reacting to it.
I love that while we were going through this conversation, I didn't pay you to do it or anything, but you unintentionally hit on all three of like what I always talk about as change management for everybody. You have to start with a really strong why, a clear vision, being able to communicate that to people and have them understand it. You have to have really good communication. And you talked about doing things like getting in there, building good relationships with people, actually understanding where they're coming from. And then that last piece of celebrating small wins and like recognizing how much that builds momentum. Mm-hmm. I didn't even have to do anything. You just lead that way. You go off of that philosophy as natural.
Well, I think we're just fully aligned, Emma, we're fully aligned. And there's actually, going back to the unlearning conversation, there's a quote, I'm pretty sure it's by Lee Iacocca, but you can validate that. But it's the most successful business person is the one who holds on to the old just as long as it's good and grabs the new just as soon as it's better. So that is the baton handoff of unlearning and then learning, right? It's like, okay, I have to, in order to take the baton and get to a better place, to get to the desired future state. And so if people aren't willing to unlearn, like people say all the time that they're willing to learn and upskill and all these things, but like, how much are you willing to let go of? How much clutter are you willing to, donate, if you will, because you have to break free of these ingrained habits, these assumptions, these mental models, right, that are no longer serving you, and they're certainly not going to support you, in the direction the organization's headed. So I think unlearning is very, very important. Mm-hmm. But how you do that, right? I think you just have to show people that you can get to where we need you to go, but we don't need to get you there maybe all at once. Outside of the examples we talked about, where it's like, hey, listen, there's an existential threat. Yeah. There's something that's cybersecurity or whatever, something that is going to dramatically impact the business continuity. Then it's like, hey, we don't have time for you to work through this. Like, we just need you to do it immediately. Mm-hmm. But like I said, a lot of the stuff that's happening as it relates to innovation, change, and doing things differently, you have a little bit of time. I don't know if that's going to be true forever, like, because it's just moving so quick. Mm-hmm. So that's the thing. It's like at some point, people that have been hanging around and trying to be spectators here, I think they're going to be forced to go through a change process that's going to be a lot more uncomfortable than had they just got started, a long time ago.
Well, and I think you bring up an interesting point, though, about that like baton handoff of being willing to unlearn and learn and move forward, but also recognizing that like not every shiny object is valuable immediately. And I think when you find that balance appropriately, people will start to trust the ideas that you're bringing forward more often than not, because they recognize that you're looking for that balance and finding that time to move, as opposed to exhausting them on like a little hamster wheel of constant change for the sake of change. So I think that that's a really important part to bring up too, is that like if you're striving for that balance and being thoughtful about when you bring in the tools, it's more likely that you're going to get that buy-in and that acceptance from people, because they're going to recognize that like, okay, now it is time to change, as opposed to being exhausted and frustrated that something else is coming down the pipe.
Right, which goes back to what you shared earlier, like that strategic vision that needs to be developed, like where are we going? And then really good storytelling. So who's communicating that vision? Hopefully it's happening across the organization. Hopefully your champions and your early adopters are part of that narrative. Mm-hmm. But you have to give people a compelling why, even in scenarios where they don't have a choice, Yeah.
Like, they still need to understand it.
Like you want them to go, And so I think establishing a strong why, we talk about the 3 whys. I think having a really good vision, I think being able to communicate that vision, being a good storyteller, I think that is absolutely mission critical. When you're looking to do this type of thing to organizations. And even now, like, I think the skill sets are going to change. Like we were talking, about the machine human era, right? And human skills being valued at a premium, right? And you start to look at like as an example, in the technology space, there's a lot of really smart people, right, that are technologists, right? And then they're talking to really smart people that have to use the technology, right? But oftentimes those conversations, it's really just people talking past each other, right? Yep. They're not translating, right? The soft skills in that middle layer, it's not there. And so I think people are going to have to start to develop those human skills, those soft skills, the EQ over IQ, thinking like more of a consultant almost, having to have like automation fluency, having the ability, like I said, to translate things. And that's actually the cool thing about AI, because if you use AI right, like AI can help you draft and develop those narratives. I use it all the time to help me with storytelling, to break down complex topics, subjects, issues into easily digestible sound bites or narratives. So you don't have to be good at it today. You can use the tools to get better at it. But I definitely think, that's going to be a big part of it, is the human touch, the relationships, the storytelling, all that. Because technology, itself solves nothing. So you really need people and process to evolve along with it. Otherwise, there's really no change at all.
So with that, we'll end on that mic drop, because that is probably one of the most important messages that people can get through their head, especially in the era of AI, where we're doing a lot of chasing of those shiny objects. But thank you so much for joining me, Jason, and for everybody for joining us here on the podcast. Of course, reach out to either one of us if you've got any questions, and make sure that you give Jason a follow over on LinkedIn to get connected and stay connected. But thank you again, and have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. If you like what you saw, be sure to come back on a weekly basis and subscribe for more expert interviews focused on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.